for a few participants to return to the breakout room, to the main session, from the breakout rooms to the main session. And as we wait on them, I'll be looking for some volunteers to talk about this idea of false growth mindset. What is it and what does it look like? And you're welcome to reference the articles, of course. All right, I think we have most everybody has returned now from our breakout rooms. And I'm looking for someone who did not speak during the last Think, Pair, Share to share out something they learned about false growth mindset. Either what is it or what does it look like?
Hi. I was pretty surprised to find out that false growth mindset is well, it makes perfect sense, but to find out that basically telling a student that you can do anything is false growth mindset. And I mean, I guess that is something that I do kind of agree with. You always want to be positive, but then you also don't want to like sell a student like false dreams or false hopes. Like you want to kind of be realistic with them and look at their strengths and what it is that they really bring to the table rather than just giving like inflated praise.
That's a great point. Thank you so much. And that's something the article talks specifically about, is that idea of using that phrase, you can do anything, needs context. It absolutely does. And so that's a great point. Can I hear from somebody else? Thank you so much.
I'll go ahead and give a reflection, get it over with. So we talked about mainly about the praising effort alone. And, oh, what was her name? Who is my partner? I'm horrible.
Verlene.
Verlene, thank you. So Verlene talked about how she praises effort in different levels, sometimes through stickers, sometimes through like, did a great job, you did a good job. I just tend to put good job on a lot of things, especially little formative assessments. But sometimes I don't really like what they have, but I'm just trying to go so fast that I say good job, good job, good job, because it's online stuff that I'm doing. But praising it a little more specifically would be, especially if I don't really like what they put, like they copied and pasted a lot of stuff from my PowerPoint as their answers or something, which drives me up a wall because to me it's not showing learning. I do it the first time, but then after I get numb and I'm like, I stop doing it because I get tired of it because I just want to grade. So we were saying maybe coming up with growth mindset feedback or phrases that we could use or be more specific, especially for bigger projects, be more specific on what they did well and what they still need to improve on. And she mentioned about a book. I don't know if something called like growth mindset feedback phrases, something to that effect, of something that could be purchased that could be kind of give you some growth mindset options.
And Verlene, thank you so much, Denise. And if Verlene, if you're able to share about that book in the chat, I'm sure some of us would be very interested. So thank you. And I think what you're really capturing there is that you can't praise for effort alone. You have to think about, am I praising for effort in a way that I have high expectations for my students? So it's connecting that effort back to that high expectation. And I think that really helps you avoid that false growth mindset, definitely. All right, there were a few other points in the article, so I'd love to hear from two more people.
I'll talk.
Sure.
Rita and I talked a bit about blaming the student's mindset in that point of, and we kind of had some questions about it because we thought, does that mean you don't talk about mindset at all? Like I teach math and I have students that will come and say, I'm not a math person. Math just isn't my thing. And we were trying to differentiate between the idea of saying, well, you're not doing well because it's your mindset that you're not doing well. Versus, okay, that might be the case. right now, but what are the strategies for shifting out of that mindset and moving forward? So we had some sticking points right there because we didn't want it to be, well, let's not talk about mindset at all, but that is almost how it sounded in the article.
And before I speak to that, does anyone want to address Anne Marie's question? So there are two things that I think about. One is I think one of the takeaways that's trying to be emphasized with that part of the article is be willing to step back and look at your teaching. And so one, think about what am I doing as a teacher that may be preventing the student from being where I need the student to be. And so that's one thing I think they want you to think about is don't place the blame solely on the student's mindset. And then the other thing I took away from that is be willing to step away from the mindset discussion for a moment and talk to the student about how they prepare for your class, how they study for your class, what are they doing to be successful in your class? Because sometimes I realize I've set these expectations, but I wasn't explicit enough about them. And so making sure when I said, you know, you should be studying every night 2 hours for this class, did I make it clear to that students what that 2 hours should look like, how they could break up that 2 hours to spend time reading the textbook, doing practice problems, writing down questions that they have for me in class the next day. And so those are two strategies I've used to sort of shift it away from the student's mindset. And then the third strategy is promote that positive self-talk. And so ask the student, I hear what you're saying. How can we add this word yet? Or how can we turn what you said into something that is an opportunity for growth rather than this space where you're stuck in this fixed mindset? And so those are sort of three different ways I've dealt with it. Does anyone else have anything they want to add to Anne Marie's question?
Well, we briefly talked in our group, what would be the negative repercussions of bringing a fixed growth mindset, projecting our fixed growth mindset onto our students, right? Because sometimes we may think, I don't know if it could happen, if this could pass, you know? Or we might say, these exponents are really tricky this week, you know, and it sort of sets up a self-fulfilling prophecy almost. It's just not good.
And you actually brought up a research study that I always share with my prospective teachers. And I can't think of both authors, but what they did is they looked at student achievement in elementary school classrooms. And they found when teachers used phrases in the classroom like, I wasn't really good at math either, and I grew up to be successful, they set this, what you're talking about, this self-fulfilling prophecy. And they found that actually in those classrooms, students did worse. And so they've told teachers in elementary schools to be really careful about the language you use with your students, because so often they see an elementary school teacher as someone who is successful and someone with a college degree and someone that has hit these certain academic bars, yet it was okay for them not to be good at math. And we don't want to set that up. We don't want to use that as a crutch. And so you're absolutely right. What we say and the messages we send, whether they're explicit or implicit, are incredibly important. And I will make a note to find that study and share it because it is really, really interesting, the results of that. They found were truly impactful on student achievement. And so you bring up a great point. And can we hear from one more person around this idea of false growth mindset?
We had a slightly different experience. I was in the same room as the last speaker, but there were two of us. There were actually three of us in there. Two of us had not been raised culturally. I was raised in the United Kingdom. Ivor was raised in Taiwan, and neither of us were raised with any kind of positive feedback at all in our lives. You were told to get on with it, and if you didn't, you were punished. And we also even talked about being caned and spanked, and that was fairly mainstream. So I think it's amazing we actually survived, really. But some of this is going to be cultural, you know, and we have to think about that even with the students that we're dealing with. So just a little bit more off topic, but it was very interesting to be paired with someone who had a very similar experience in terms of the sort of mindset you were delivered as a child.
Absolutely. And so thinking about that, how we've had these experiences as students in classrooms, we were all students for many, many years, and thinking about how our experiences may be relatable. We may be able to relate to our students in some sense, but they also might look very differently. And the cultural norms around how we give feedback is definitely, there's variation across cultures in how feedback is given. And I have to admit, I've seen a shift in my own schooling from something very similar where there was this sort of punishment or criticism, and now we've moved more towards promoting growth mindsets. So I do think we're, as educators, learning from research, and that we have started to see these changes in K-12 education. And now we're trying to make those changes in higher education as well. And I hope we continue to do so and continue to learn from people doing this research that links student achievement to growth mindset, and links student achievement to these messages we send about mindsets to our students. So thank you, Heidi, for bringing that up. That's an incredibly important point. Would anyone else like to speak before I move on? I think you all did a very nice job of capturing some of those ideas around false growth mindset. All right, so by popular request, what I noticed from the exit tickets is that a lot of people were frustrated or disappointed that we didn't get to spend a lot of time talking about how we name the strengths in students' contributions, especially when student work is wrong or incomplete. So I thought about how to go back to this topic and give us an opportunity to debrief around it. So first, let me sort of remind you all what we talked about last session. This comes from a larger body of work on complex instruction and this idea of assigning competence. And Cohen and Lotan talk about when you assign competence, you want it to be public, you want it to be specific, you want it to be an intellectual strength, and you want it to be based on the student's contribution, and you want it to be connected to the group's progress or work on a task. And so that's a lot. You're trying to format this sentence so that you hit on all of those points. And so Lisa Jilk, to do this with secondary teachers, she came up with this sentence frame that I introduced briefly last session. It was SMART win, and then you insert the student's name, did, said, and you give the evidence, and then you tell why it was SMART. I think this was SMART because, and you talk about how this strength supports the group's learning or the student's learning. And so that was that basic structure. And I commend you all, those of you that had the opportunity to do the pre-session activities. A lot of you got practice with this sentence frame. And so I wanted to share some of those sentence frame, how some of you use the sentence frame in our pre-session activities. So here are some examples from the science group. It was SMART when Bill said, the sugars are passed on again. And I think this was smart because it shows making connections between different parts of the food web and where nutrients originally come from. What I really liked about this example is that they actually revoiced the student's words, what the student had written in their work, and they were very specific about why that was an important contribution. Here's a second one. It was smart when Gerardo employed the food chain as part of his answer. I also think it was smart in that he realized that the hawk was a secondary consumer. He recognized that energy content originates in the plants that herbivores consume. And so while it didn't use the strict structure of the sentence frame, there was no because, you can still see that justification in that last sentence. And so what I wanted to emphasize with that is that the sentence frame is a way to start doing it. and then you're going to make it your own. And I have some examples from our other disciplines. In engineering, it was smart when Connor said that the reason to test the prototype was to see if it works or needs to be modified. And I think this was smart because Connor's answer shows he is thinking about a specific logical reason why we should do that step. When Connor knows the reason for this step, it will guide him to perform the step better in real life. Another example from engineering, it was smart when Adam concisely described the engineering design process for building a house. And I think this was smart because it shows that to describe the process, you don't need to be wordy. So once again, getting at this idea, I think that's what's really nice about that is it goes beyond talking about the engineering aspects, but also what goes into technical writing. This idea that one part of technical writing is being efficient and being concise. And then we also had some examples in mathematics. And by the way, there are so many examples to choose from. So I only got to put up a portion. And I encourage you to go back and read your responses, and you'll get a chance to talk more about those responses too. But in math it was smart when Gemma drew both the front and the side view of the box for the smoothies. And I think this was smart because it helps us to see the measurements of the end result so that we can plan for the measurements and shape of the net. This is helpful to know what our end goal is for this box. And another example, Amy did a great job of labeling the net of the box. Amy gave information about the net stating that the diameter of the bottle and the number of the bottles, the diameter of the bottle and the number of bottles the box will hold. This is smart because it tells anyone looking at this net what it was meant for. And then from our student affairs group, it was smart when the Buffington University student provided source information for the materials they wrote and edited. And I think this was smart because it allows prospective employees to review samples of their work. And the second excerpt I chose was, it was smart when Mary Hernandez provided her linked up, it's a fictitious profile, which is why it says linked up profile information. And I think it was smart because it allows her to professionally market her skills that might not be on her resume. And so those were our 4 content areas. We saw science student work samples, math student work samples, engineering student work samples, and student affairs student work samples. Now, I know with this activity that some of you may be in different spots, but what we're going to do in these breakout rooms, we're really going to focus on steps 2, 3, and 4, because that's what we didn't get to do during our last session. So 1, you're going to be in breakout rooms by content area. 2, something I learned from doing this professional development 2 weeks ago is that sometimes when we're doing a Zoom session versus an in-person professional development, you need to include some additional instructions. So 1, in order to do this, I put some additional information directions in the folder that we used last time in Google Classroom, and I'll move away from the PowerPoint in a minute to remind you about that, but that's there now. And I also added group roles to make the discussion go a little bit smoother. Step 3, all right, after you've had a chance to look at the work samples and sort them by students' level of understanding, take turns using the sentence frame. For those of you that have already used the sentence frame, share what you wrote in the pre-session, but I also challenge you to come up with additional examples or refine your examples. Those of you that did not have an opportunity to do this ahead of time, you now have a chance to say the strengths and students' contributions using Jilk's sentence frame. Lastly, this is the most important part. We didn't get to reflect and debrief this activity. So you'll also get a chance in your group to debrief the activity using the discussion prompts. And let me share with you what those are. So what you'll do for that, you're thinking about what are some strengths you noticed in the student work. Think about when was it easy to notice student strengths? When was it more challenging to notice student strengths? And then lastly, how do you plan to name the strengths in students' contributions in your courses? So thinking about how this might apply to what you're doing as an instructor. And let me see. All right, so let me stop sharing and see if I can switch over. Sorry, this is one part of being on Zoom. So what I've done, all right, so if you return to our Google Classroom, and let me share that. You'll see that our activities for session 2 are now live. And so from there, there's a link to the Google Drive folder. And I owe a shout out to Laura. I didn't see the message that people were having trouble finding this folder. So I apologize, and I appreciate you for linking it again, where some people like commented about having trouble finding it. And then the one thing I wanted to share is that I added this document. And what's nice about this document is it helps guide you through the discussion, since I can't be in every breakout room at the same time. And so one, you'll see similar roles to what I shared last time. So one thing when you do small group discussion, you want to assign roles to your students and make sure your students understand those roles. So step 1 will be working with your group to pick a role. And you will have more than 4 people in most groups, so you may have some overlap in those roles. Then you're going to move to the discussion. And we're going to give you all up to 20 minutes. And we basically want you to touch on 3 things. 1, get a sense of each student's level of understanding. So who really understood the task, whether your task is the science task, the math task, the engineering task, or the student affairs task, which is actually writing a resume. 2, practice using the sentence frame. And that's a chance for everybody's voice to be heard. So make sure if you are the facilitator, let me scroll back up to this. All right. If you're the facilitator, you want to make sure everyone's ideas are heard. And if you're the recorder, you want to think some about how you'll make everyone's results heard when we return from the discussion. And then the third thing you're going to do is think some about these prompts. For this particular activity, I didn't create 10 different copies of this for the 10 different breakout rooms. So one option is to take your notes in here, but understand other groups might do the same. Or you can simply copy this, add one below, and put your notes in there. So that's another option as well. Any questions about where things are located or what we'll be doing in these breakout rooms? Yes, I see, okay, I'm looking at the chat. Let me back up to that folder. So I put the link now directly to the folder for the Google document. And all of them, you should have viewing privileges, except the last document I opened, and that you should have editing privileges. And then in terms of the reference for the JILC article, it's at the end of the PowerPoint. And I'm also happy if any of you contact me through email. I think Lisa Jilk has that article on ResearchGate, but I will double check and see if there's public access to it and if I can share that article. So I see that message as well. All right, so what we're going to do now is Leslie's going to help us transfer to those breakout rooms, and you'll be with people of a similar content area.
Hello, Shoma? Shoma, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I'm sorry. My internet connection is going in and out.
Which content area are you, your name is not on my list. So are you into, we have engineering, math, science,
Science, biology.
student affairs. So you'd be under science?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll put you in a group with science people. Thank you. So I'll put you with group number 4, actually group number 5. Sure. And Heidi, hello. So you're with group number 6. I'll put you with group number 6 now. Group number 6. Okay, I think we're good. Where I put number 11. So I'm gonna move you, Ada, to 11. That's where the rest of the gang is.